My name is Erin Blake. I'm 35 years old and I grew up in a small town in Vermont that never really felt like home. Not because of the place, but because I was never the daughter my parents wanted. From as early as I can remember, I was the one who didn't quite fit. My sisters were bubbly and polished, always winning ribbons at school and singing in church on Sundays. I was quieter, kept to myself, asked too many questions, and never smiled enough for my mother's liking. They used to say I had a cold heart, that I was ungrateful, withdrawn a problem that needed fixing. What they never understood was that I wasn't distant. I was just tired of pretending I was someone I wasn't. My parents stopped asking about my life when I was 17. By the time I left for college, I'd already learned how to disappear from their expectations. Holidays were awkward, short. Phone calls turned into text messages, then nothing at all. They used to brag about my sisters. One became a lawyer, the other married a surgeon. I worked in government, but I never told them what I actually did. They assumed I failed because I didn't post pictures, didn't show up to family reunions, didn't send holiday cards with a glossy photo of smiling kids. But Danny knew. My little brother was 6 years younger than I and had this way of seeing past everything. He used to crawl into my bed when he had nightmares, whispering that he felt like he didn't belong either. We understood each other without needing to explain. When I moved out, Danny was the only one who stayed in touch. Every Sunday, he'd send a random picture, his coffee, a weird cloud, his dog, and a message that just said, "You'd like this." He didn't need a response. He just needed the connection. I saw him 2 years ago in New York. He showed up out of the blue, said he had something on his mind. We spent 3 hours walking along the Hudson, not saying much, just being. That was the last time I saw him alive. 2 weeks ago, I got the call. Danny had died in a car accident. A drunk driver late at night. I didn't even know he was in California. They didn't tell me about the funeral. I found out through a mutual friend who thought I already knew. There was no message from my parents, no phone call, nothing. Just silence, like always. Still, I booked the flight. I couldn't not go. Even if I had to sit in the back or stand in the parking lot, I had to be there. As I landed back in Vermont, everything felt the same but heavier. The trees, the roads, even the cold air reminded me that I had never belonged here. I was coming back not as a daughter or a sister, but as the one person who loved Danny enough to show up even when I wasn't wanted. I drove past my old school, the diner where we used to sneak milkshakes, the park where I taught Danny how to ride a bike. It all looked frozen in time, like the town never moved on. But I had. When I pulled into the church parking lot, I hesitated. I could already imagine the faces inside. The whispers, the way my mother would clench her jaw. I took a deep breath and stepped out anyway. I didn't bring flowers. I didn't wear black. I came with everything I was never allowed to show them. Grief, anger, love, and a truth they never cared to ask about. This wasn't for them. This was for Danny. The moment I stepped inside the church, the air shifted. Conversation dimmed into murmurs, and heads turned just enough to notice, but not enough to acknowledge. I felt it before anyone said a word, the weight of eyes of judgment of being the stranger at her own brother's funeral. My mother glanced back, caught my eye, then looked away, like she hadn't seen me at all. My father stood rigid by the front pew, pretending to be deeply engaged in conversation with a family friend. My sisters didn't even turn around. An usher hesitated when I handed him my name. Then he pointed silently to a row in the far back, next to the exit and across from the restroom. I walked past familiar faces that refused to meet my gaze. A few nodded politely, tight-lipped and cautious, like acknowledging me might cause trouble. I sat down alone. The cushion beside me remained empty, though there was space in the family section. They left it that way on purpose. I wasn't just uninvited. I was unwelcome. Behind me, someone whispered too loudly, I didn't think she'd show. Another voice followed, softer but colder. Of course she did. She always makes things about herself. I didn't turn around. A cousin I hadn't seen in a decade offered a stiff smile from across the aisle, then turned back to his phone. One of my aunts walked right past me like I wasn't even there. No hug, no hello, just silence. The pew creaked when I shifted. The woman beside me, some distant relative, slid a little farther down the bench, as if grief could be contagious, as if I might ruin something by sitting too close. I looked toward the front at the casket draped in white flowers and tried not to cry. I wasn't sure if the ache in my chest was for Danny or for all the years I spent being erased. Probably both. When the minister spoke Danny's name, I braced for the memories, but the eulogy barely mentioned me. He was described as a wonderful brother, a loyal son, a beloved friend. But no one said he had an older sister who once taught him how to tie his shoes, or who picked him up drunk at prom so he wouldn't get in trouble. They erased me from his story, the same way they erased me from the family photos. I sat there in silence, holding my grief like a secret no one wanted to hear. No one looked back. No one asked how I was doing. And yet I stayed. Not because they wanted me there, but because Danny would have. He would have made a joke, offered me a seat in the front row, and told me I looked tired but cool. That was enough reason. So I sat by the restroom, surrounded by whispers, invisible yet refusing to disappear. My sister walked slowly to the podium, holding a folded piece of paper in her trembling hands. The room hushed as she cleared her throat and began to speak in that soft, rehearsed voice she always used when she wanted to sound perfect. I braced myself, hoping maybe foolishly that I'd hear something real. She started by calling Danny her soul twin. She talked about how close they were growing up, how she was the one who always looked after him. She described staying up late with him during his rough patches, helping him through his anxiety and making him feel safe. I stared at her, waiting for her to correct the narrative, to say that I was there too, that I was the one who kept him from spiraling that winter he couldn't get out of bed, the one who covered his rent when he was too proud to ask for help. But she didn't. Instead, she told everyone that she was Danny's emotional anchor, that he came to her for everything. She said they were closer than anyone else in the family. I sat frozen in that back pew, fists clenched in my lap, heart thudding in my ears. When she mentioned the family beach trip, the one I wasn't invited to, I felt my throat tighten. She talked about holding his hand at the hospital, how she never left his side. I knew for a fact she'd only flown in the day before he died. I'd been covering his bills for 3 months. The audience nodded, some wiping their eyes. People who didn't know better believed every word. My sister's voice cracked at all the right moments. Her grief looked beautiful. I stood up. I didn't plan to. It just happened. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, to say something, anything that reminded them Danny had more than one sibling, that I existed. But before I could say a word, my mother turned around and hissed, "Don't ruin this day for the rest of us." Her eyes were sharp, wet, and cold. She looked at me like I was dirt on her shoes. I sat down slowly, pulse racing, breath shallow. I'd come all this way to say goodbye, to be present for the one person who made me feel loved. And now I was being told to be quiet. Again. The room clapped when my sister finished. The sound was muffled in my head, like I was underwater. I felt like a ghost in a room full of people mourning a version of Danny that wasn't real. That moment broke something in me. Not because they forgot me, but because they chose to. They rewrote our story, and no one blinked, but I was done letting them erase me. The reception hall was filled with the sound of clinking forks against china and the low murmur of small talk. I sat alone at a table in the back, an untouched plate in front of me, while laughter rose from the center tables where my family had gathered. They looked so at ease, like the service had been enough, like grief had been checked off their list. I stared at a half-empty wine glass, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Every word from the eulogy still echoed in my mind. My sister's polished lies, my mother's command to stay silent, the way my father never even looked at me. It had always been like this. For years I'd swallowed what I wanted to say, convinced it wasn't worth the fight. But something about hearing my relationship with Danny rewritten like it was nothing, like I was nothing, burned too deep to ignore. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor and heads turned. My heart pounded so hard it felt like my chest might split. But my voice came out steady. I need to say something. A hush fell over the room. My mother's fork froze mid-air. My sister blinked like I'd slapped her. I didn't wait for permission. You all just listened to a version of Danny that left out the most important part of his story. And I can't let that stand. Not anymore. No one moved. A cousin looked down at his plate. My aunt narrowed her eyes. My father's expression was unreadable. Danny wasn't just your golden boy or your fun sibling or your perfect child. He was a young man who struggled deeply, and I was the one who sat with him through it. My voice cracked, but I kept going. You didn't know about the nights he called me at 2 a.m. crying because he didn't feel real. You didn't hear him beg me not to tell anyone he was scared. You didn't see his hands shake when he talked about not belonging anywhere. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. But no one interrupted me. I stayed on video calls with him until sunrise. I talked him out of hurting himself more times than I can count. I sent him books, playlists, and terrible memes. I paid off his ER bill when he couldn't breathe and didn't want to tell you because he thought you'd call him weak. My sister's face went pale. My mother looked furious. But I wasn't done. He didn't come to you. He came to me, because I never asked him to pretend. Tears blurred my vision. I wiped them away with the back of my hand. And I never asked you to see me either. But he did. Danny saw me. When I moved away and you all said I'd never last, he sent postcards every week. When I took that job overseas and no one asked what I was doing, he called to say he was proud of me. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling. This is the last message he sent me. It said, "You've always been the only one who saw the real me. Thank you for never giving up on me when I gave up on myself." The room was dead quiet. A woman in the corner began to cry. My father looked like he wanted to disappear. I took a breath. You can pretend I wasn't part of his life. You can erase me from your speeches and your photos. But Danny knew who I was. He knew I loved him and he loved me back. That's real. And it matters. Someone stood up in the back and started clapping. It was a friend of Danny's that I didn't recognize. Others followed slowly. Not my family, but strangers who saw the truth when it was finally spoken. I looked around the room and saw faces I'd grown up with now turned toward me in a way they never had before. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the only one who hadn't lied to herself. And in that moment I realized I didn't care if they liked me. I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for Danny, for me, for every time I was told to shrink. I would never be erased again. I stepped out of the reception hall into the fading light, my lungs aching like I hadn't breathed in hours. The air was cooler than I remembered, crisp in a way that wrapped around me like a reminder I was still here. My heels clicked against the pavement as I headed toward my car, unsure if I felt lighter or just hollow. Just as I reached for the door handle, I heard someone call my name. Not sharply, gently. I turned to see a man in his early 40s, wearing a grey coat and glasses, standing a few feet away with something in his hands. "I'm Mark," he said. offering a small smile. Danny's therapist. I blinked. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Then I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. He stepped closer, slow and careful, like approaching a deer. I saw you speak in there, he said. You were brave. He would have been proud. That broke me a little. I looked away, pressing my hand to my chest like I could hold something in place that was threatening to fall apart. He didn't try to comfort me. He just stood there, letting the quiet settle. I've been working with Danny for the past 2 years, he said after a pause, and you came up. A lot. My eyebrows lifted. I did. All the time, he said. He called you his lighthouse, said no matter how dark things got, you always found a way to reach him. He never felt judged by you, just understood. Tears blurred my eyes again, but this time they didn't sting. They felt warm, almost welcome. I hadn't expected to hear this from anyone, let alone a stranger. Mark pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket. It was cream-coloured and sealed with Danny's neat handwriting on the front. My name. He gave me this months ago, he said. Told me to pass it to you if anything ever happened. He called it his just-in-case letter, said you'd know what it meant. I took the envelope with both hands, like it was something sacred. My fingers trembled around the edges. The weight of it wasn't much, but it landed on me like something that could split my chest open. He really loved you, Erin, Mark said, voice low. You were the only person he said never made him feel broken. I nodded, unable to speak. For once, the silence didn't feel cruel. It felt earned. A moment shared between two people who both knew how much Danny had mattered. Mark touched my arm lightly, then stepped back. Take your time with it, he said, but don't wait forever. He walked away, blending into the parking lot, like he'd never been there. I stood by my car letter clutched in my hands and felt something shift inside me. Not peace, exactly, but something close, something steady. Someone had seen the real me, someone who mattered. And in that quiet, I finally let myself cry without shame. I opened the envelope in the silence of my car, hands still shaking from everything that had come before. The letter was 2 pages written in Danny's careful print, not typed, not rushed. I took a breath and began to read. Hey, Erin. If you're reading this, something went wrong. I hate that. I really do. I wanted to say all this to you in person. Not leave it behind in a sealed piece of paper like some dramatic goodbye. But I've learned enough from our talks to know life doesn't always wait for us to be ready. First, I need you to know how much I love you. That word gets thrown around a lot, but I mean it in the deepest, realest way. You were my first safe place. When we were kids and everything in that house felt too loud, too strict, too fake, you were the one who made space for me to just be. I still remember that night I had a nightmare about Dad yelling, and you let me sleep on your floor even though you had school early. You didn't tell me to toughen up. You just said, "It's okay, I get it." And somehow I knew you really did. You were the only one who saw me. Not the version I had to pretend to be, but the real me. The one who wasn't sure if I was ever going to be enough. You never made me feel like I had to earn your love. It was just there. I know I didn't say it enough, but you saved me so many times. When I felt like I was drowning in my own head, when I thought I was too broken to fix, you were the one who kept showing up. The late-night calls, the playlists, the dumb jokes. You gave me reasons to stay. There were nights when I didn't think I'd make it to morning, and then I'd get your text. Something simple. Still here. And I'd remember that someone actually wanted me to be. I don't know if you ever knew how powerful that was. I wish I had defended you more. I hate that I didn't. I hate that I let them talk about you like you were a disappointment when you were the strongest person I knew. I hate that I laughed along sometimes just to keep things easy. You didn't deserve that. You never asked for anything, not even recognition. But I see you. I've always seen you. You are brilliant, Erin. Brave. Honest in a way that made people uncomfortable because it forced them to look at themselves. I watched you build a life on your own terms, even when no one clapped for you. Even when they pretended you weren't succeeding just because they couldn't control the narrative. But I knew, and I was proud, every single day. Please stop trying to make them see you. They don't deserve that kind of access to your heart. You gave them so many chances, and they didn't take any of them. That's on them, not you. You don't need their approval. You never did. Everything good I know about love I learned from you. Not from our parents, not from church or school, but from you. You showed me what it looks like to love without keeping score. To stay soft, even when the world tries to harden you. You made it okay for me to feel things. You made it okay for me to hope. If I'm gone, I need you to remember this. You are not invisible. You are not hard to love. You are not a failure. You are a lighthouse. You pulled me through every storm I thought would swallow me whole. You're the best person I've ever known, and I'm sorry you had to carry so much alone. I wish I could have made things easier for you. I wish I had said all this sooner. But maybe now you'll believe it. Live big. Laugh when you feel like crying. Say what needs to be said. And don't look back unless it's to remind yourself how far you've come. I'll always be with you. Not in some cheesy spirit way, but in the real ways that matter. In your courage, in your kindness, in every moment you choose to be exactly who you are. Thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself. Yours. Always. Danny, I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap. My chest so full it ached. The words settled into the places that had been hollow for years. He saw me. He always had. And somehow, even in death, he had found a way to lift me one more time. The morning after the funeral, I woke up in the guest room of a motel just off the highway. The sheets smelled like bleach, and the light crept in through thin curtains. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like hiding. My chest was still heavy, but something had shifted. I brewed weak coffee from the machine by the sink and sat at the small desk with Danny's letter folded beside me. I read it again slower this time, letting the words soak into the quiet. There was no anger left, just the truth. I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my sisters. I scrolled through my phone and deleted every old message chain that ended in silence or judgment or guilt. I didn't need the weight of conversations that never really happened. Back in my apartment days later, I found the shoebox where I kept every postcard Danny ever sent me. I reread the one with the dog in sunglasses and laughed out loud. Then I packed them neatly into a new box, one with a lock, like I was building a vault for the version of me he loved. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a dramatic confrontation. What I wanted was distance. What I wanted was my life back. So I cleaned out the drawers I'd left untouched for years, got rid of the just-in-case clothes I never wore to family dinners, threw away the framed photos that only ever reminded me I was edited out. Then I called my parents. I didn't expect them to pick up. They didn't. The voicemail beeped, and I said what I needed to say. I hope one day you choose truth over image. That's it. I ended the call and didn't replay the message. I didn't need to hear myself to know it was right. For the first time, I wasn't trying to sound measured or calm or like someone they'd listen to. I was just done. Done shrinking, done softening myself to make other people more comfortable. done waiting for a seat at a table I was never invited to. I started walking in the evenings again. Let the wind touch my face, let my thoughts go where they wanted without apology. I met a neighbor for coffee and told her my real job. She said, "That's amazing," and actually meant it. I carried Danny with me in the small ways that mattered. A playlist in my earbuds, a sticky note on my mirror, a memory I let live instead of locking away. Grief doesn't leave, but neither does love. And when you stop asking for love from the wrong people, it's easier to feel the kind that's always been there. I'm not the black sheep. I'm the one who walked away, and I'm never looking back.